The first jolt came like a fist slamming into the belly of the jet. Every head in the cabin lifted, eyes wide, searching for answers no one had. The private aircraft groaned under the strain, its aluminum skin trembling as if it might peel away at any second. Over the hum of the engines came a deep rattle, the kind that settled into bones, the kind no one could mistake for normal. Country singer Daniel Reeves gripped the armrests so tightly his knuckles turned white. He had flown hundreds of times, more than he could count, but nothing about this felt like routine turbulence. The air smelled sharp with recycled oxygen and faint coffee, but underneath was the bitter bite of fear, sweat rising from passengers who suddenly felt the fragility of the machine holding them above the earth. The seatbelt sign glared overhead, casting a red-orange glow on nervous faces. Beside Daniel sat his manager, Laura, pressing her lips into a thin line, her eyes darting from the window to the aisle. Across from them, guitarist Mike muttered a half-formed prayer, his hand covering his eyes. The jet lurched again, harder, throwing a water bottle across the aisle, where it rolled to the feet of the flight attendant, crouched in her jump seat. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain's voice crackled through the intercom, strained but steady, "we're experiencing severe turbulence. Please remain seated and keep your seatbelts fastened." The words were calm, but the vibrations in the metal betrayed the truth. The plane was being tossed in air currents it could not tame. Daniel stared at the ceiling, at the flashing light above him, and thought about how small they were, how helpless. Outside the oval windows, nothing but bruised grey sky. Clouds heaved and split, showing flashes of sunlight like blades before swallowing them again. It felt endless, as if the jet had entered a place that existed outside of time, a place where survival was not guaranteed. Daniel pressed his palms together. Without realizing it, the motion automatic, as if his body remembered prayers his mouth had long stopped saying. The engines roared louder, the seats shuddered harder, and for the first time in years, he whispered something that felt like surrender. "God, if you're here." The sound of his own words startled him. He wasn't the type to make speeches to the sky. His life had been filled with stages, with guitars, with neon lights, not pews and hymnals. Yet up here, in the thin air between earth and heaven, he felt the weight of his choices pressing down. A violent drop yanked screams from passengers, one woman sobbing openly, another clutching the hand of a stranger beside her. Daniel felt the pull in his stomach, the sickening reminder that gravity was waiting far below. He closed his eyes and tried to breathe. Something stirred in him, not calm exactly, but a strange clarity. For the first time, he wasn't the one in control. And if you're reading this, if your chest tightened just imagining that sudden drop, then you know what fear tastes like. Stay with this story. And if you want to walk with us through the rest of this flight, through the voices and moments that will not leave us, subscribe, because this is only the beginning. The jet shuddered again, harder, as if the sky itself wanted to see how much faith could endure. The noise inside the jet wasn't only the engines or the shaking panels. It was the silence between the passengers, the kind that comes when fear steals words. Laura sat with her hands flat against her knees, fingers trembling, her jaw locked as though holding back everything she wanted to scream. Mike had pulled his cap down low over his eyes, but Daniel could see his lips moving. He was reciting something over and over, but it wasn't a lyric. The overhead lights flickered once, then steadied. The flight attendant, Emily, leaned forward in her jump seat, clutching the straps that crossed her chest. Her training told her not to show fear, but her pale face betrayed her. She mouthed something too. "Please, Lord." Daniel shifted in his seat, pressing his back harder against the cushion. The recycled air pumped through the vents carried a faint metallic tang now, the smell of something burning in the imagination more than in the engine. Still, it was enough to keep hearts pounding. The captain's voice came again, a little tighter this time. "Folks, we're hitting a rough jet stream. We're doing everything we can to steady her. Please, keep those seatbelts fastened." That was all. No details. No reassurance beyond routine words that sounded rehearsed. The lack of information gnawed at Daniel. He wanted to trust the voice up front, but each jolt told a different story. The jet dropped again, hard, pressing stomachs into throats. A child wailed from the back, his mother whispering frantically into his ear, trying to calm him. The sound made Daniel's chest ache. Fear was one thing when it lived in grown men's clenched fists and women's rigid spines, but hearing it roar in a child's cry stripped away the thin shell of composure. Daniel's thoughts flicked to his father. He remembered long nights on the road, back when he was just starting out, when his father would call him and say, "Don't forget where you came from, son. Don't forget who's holding you up when you can't hold yourself." At the time, he brushed it off as old-fashioned talk, words from a man who prayed more than he worked. But now, tens of thousands of feet above ground, those words came back like an anchor dropped into chaos. His palms sweated against the armrest. His throat burned with the kind of dryness that no bottle of water could ease. The turbulence grew harsher, slamming the fuselage with violent jerks. Luggage rattled in the overhead bins, one of them popping slightly open before snapping shut again. Daniel's breath came shallow. He had sung before crowds of 50,000 people, his name lit in giant letters across arenas. Yet none of that mattered now. Fame couldn't buy safety. Recognition couldn't steady wings. A whisper rose in the cabin. Some prayed under their breath, others cursed, others just gripped the seat ahead of them. Every sound mixed into a chorus of human fragility. Daniel tilted his head back, staring again at the glowing seatbelt sign. His lips moved. He didn't even choose the words. They came unbidden. "God, are you here?" No thunder, no sudden vision, just the sound of the engines roaring, the sky beating against aluminum walls, and the ache of waiting. The jet trembled again, as if reminding them all that it alone carried their fates. And yet, in the crack of silence between each jolt, Daniel felt something quiet pressing close. The captain didn't speak again for a long minute. The silence felt like a verdict. When the intercom finally cracked, another voice came, steadier, younger. "This is First Officer Evan Cole. We're deviating left to avoid a cluster ahead. We've asked Kansas City Center for lower altitude. Seatbelts remain on." The words gave shape to the fear. There was a cluster, there was a plan. Daniel latched onto that. Emily unbuckled during a softer pocket and moved down the aisle with a plastic bag, checking latches, gathering loose items. She stopped beside Daniel. "You folks okay?" Her voice was hoarse but kind. Laura nodded without confidence. Mike tried a grin and failed. Daniel said, "We're fine," though it scraped his throat. Another thud, like a palm slapping the tail. Emily braced, then crouched. "We might level at 33 if Center clears us. Could be better down there. Might be worse. I should say it'll smooth out." "Say what's true," Laura said. Emily's mouth twitched. She squeezed the armrest and continued her pass. The jet rolled right then left, a wobble that made stomachs twist. Outside, the cloud deck thickened to unbroken gray. No horizon, no landmark. Just motion, and the need to trust instruments no passenger could read. Daniel's hands steadied a little now that he had a name to hold. Evan Cole. He pictured the cockpit, the two of them shoulder to shoulder, hands moving in patterns learned 1,000 times. The radio squawked, then Evan's voice. "We're cleared down to 330, beginning descent." The nose dipped. The engines changed pitch deeper, like a groan through clenched teeth. The descent didn't bring calm. It brought a different kind of shaking, shorter and meaner, like the air had invisible ridges. A man, across the aisle, faded baseball cap, said, "My wife will kill me if I don't get home." Thin smiles. The cabin wasn't anonymous anymore. It was Thomas with the cap, the young mother Renee in back, and the older woman with a paperback now closed like a shield. Daniel tried to picture the ground, then stopped. It made him dizzier to imagine what he could not see. "Captain says there's mountain waves spilling this far east," Emily told a row behind them. "Clear air. Nothing on radar, but it can hit." "Hard." She didn't lower her voice enough. Everyone heard. The phrase stuck. Mountain wave. Another drop seized the cabin. A sob rose and flattened. Mike's fingers tapped his thigh. Laura covered his hand. Daniel watched and felt the ache of being responsible for people who had followed him into rooms he could not control. He closed his eyes and breathed through his nose. No speeches, no rehearsed prayer, just a sentence shaped by need. If you're there, teach me how to sit in this. The plane trembled in answer. Not a miracle, just wind, but the words stayed. They didn't solve anything. They let him stop pretending he wasn't afraid. That made room for a different kind of strength, the kind that doesn't crush fear, but carries it. The intercom clicked once more. "Folks," Evan said, "we're with you. We'll ride it together." It wasn't much. It was exactly what they had. The next shake wasn't the worst, but it came with a grinding vibration that crawled through the seat frames and into teeth. Daniel tasted copper. The cabin smelled like coffee, warm plastic, and nerves. A few rows back, the child who had cried now hiccuped into his mother's sweater. Emily stood at the galley, one hand on the bulkhead, the other gripping sick bags. "Captain Harris is coordinating with center," she said. "We're descending in steps." Her eyes said it might not ease. The intercom clicked. Static snapped. Then the older voice came, steady. "This is Captain Harris. Reports of mountain wave extending. Far east, clear air. Nothing broken, nothing failing. We'll step down to 290, keep seatbelts tight." A hard case banged in the baggage closet. The engines deepened as the nose dipped. Across the aisle, the man in the faded cap, Thomas, had his head bowed. "You religious?" Daniel asked. Thomas opened one eye. "Today?" "Yes." "I don't know how to do this," Daniel said. "Pray without lying." "Start with the truth," Thomas said. "Tell him you're scared." Daniel stared at the thin blue carpet. "I'm scared," he said, so quiet even he barely heard it. The jet rolled. Overhead bins rattled. Emily tapped her chest. "Breathe with me." He matched her rhythm until the world lurched and the trick broke. First Officer Evan returned to the radio. "Kansas City cleared us to 290, threading between reports ahead. Ride may worsen before it improves. We're with you up here." Laura whispered, "Sounds like your stage talk." "I'd trade places and sing for hours if it would smooth this," Daniel said. The child in back cried again, softer. His mother, Renee, hummed something thin and steady. It wasn't pretty, but it held. The airplane hit a pocket like an elevator drop. A cup skittered. Daniel grabbed Laura's wrist. She folded her fingers over his and held tight. "Listen," Thomas said. "You don't have to be good at faith, just be honest." "Honest is ugly," Daniel said. "Ugly is fine," Thomas said. "So is small." Emily moved quickly, checked belts, then strapped in as the ceiling creaked, and the floor trembled. Daniel thought of his father's storm prayer. "Lord, remind us you're near." He had mocked it once. Up here, the words felt like a door he couldn't open. Another jolt. Seatbacks chattered like teeth. Under the noise, a sentence rose. Not from speakers, not from any mouth nearby. It wasn't loud, it was plain. It was there. "I am in control." Daniel turned fast, like he'd been called by name. No one looked at him. Mike stared at his shoes. Laura bit her cheek. Emily watched the aisle. The engines thrummed. The air shook. It didn't repeat. It sat in him, heavy and simple, like a weight in a pocket that keeps the wind from taking it. He didn't trust feelings. He barely trusted words. But he knew the sound of hype, and this wasn't it. Thomas lifted his head. "You okay?" Daniel nodded, then shook his head. "I heard something." A fresh shudder took the answer. Lights flickered, then held. Renee kept humming. Emily buckled in. Daniel pressed the words into his chest and waited for the next hit. The turbulence didn't ease. It shifted, like a storm changing its grip. The jet pitched nose up, then dropped as if yanked down by a hand too large to see. Emily's head struck the padded rest behind her, but she stayed buckled, eyes squeezed shut. Daniel clung to the armrest until his wrist ached. His manager Laura muttered under her breath, not words, just a string of sound to keep from breaking. Mike pressed his forehead to his knuckles. The intercom buzzed again. "Folks," Captain Harris said, "we've requested descent below flight level 290. Ride reports are mixed, but center approved. We'll keep stepping down." The airplane nosed forward. The engine pitch rose again, a strained howl. Daniel glanced out the window. All he saw was thick grey, cloud walls that bent and folded with violent swirls. They weren't shapes you could trust. They were alive, shifting, hiding anything beyond. He blinked hard, but the view didn't change. A sudden bang. Overhead, bin door flying open, spilled a blanket into the aisle. The mother, Renee, reached down with one hand, clutching her child with the other. She tucked the blanket back, slammed the latch shut, and looked up. Her face was wet with tears, but her eyes were clear. "I'm not ready," she whispered. Daniel heard it, though no one else seemed to. "Neither am I," he thought. The jet rattled again, metal straining. Daniel leaned close to Laura. "Do you hear it too?" "Hear what?" "That voice." Laura shook her head. "What voice?" Daniel pressed his fist to his lips. He didn't answer. Thomas across the aisle leaned closer. "What did you hear?" Daniel hesitated, then said it plain. "I heard someone say, 'I am in control.'" Mike lifted his head, eyes wide. "Who said it?" "No one here," Daniel said. It wasn't human." For a moment, no one spoke. Then, the plane hit another violent drop, the whole cabin crying out at once. The roar of engines filled the gap, and nothing more was said. Emily unbuckled and stumbled down the aisle, bracing against seatbacks. She stopped beside Daniel, bent low so her words carried only to him. "Did you say you heard something?" Daniel nodded. Emily's lips parted, but she only pressed her hand against his shoulder and moved on. The nose leveled slightly. The seatbelt sign glowed steady, relentless. Daniel let his head fall back against the seat. He wanted to dismiss it, call it stress, call it panic. But deep in his chest, beneath the fear, there was an anchor he hadn't placed there. The intercom clicked once more. First Officer Evans spoke. "Weather radar shows a gap opening south. We'll try to angle through. Might be rough." Daniel closed his eyes, gripping the words he couldn't explain. "I am in control." He didn't believe easily, he didn't surrender easily. But in the endless shaking, in the grey that swallowed the windows, those 4 words felt like the only ground left. The shaking eased for 30 seconds, long enough for people to remember how to breathe. Emily unbuckled, moved 3 rows and crouched by the boy and his mother. "You're doing great," she told the child. To the mother, "Renee, right? Keep him looking at you." Renee nodded and stroked the boy's hair. "Evan," she called toward the door, as if the first officer could hear, "We're okay back here." Her voice shook but didn't break. Across the aisle, Thomas wiped his palms on his jeans. "You heard a sentence," he said to Daniel, "and I keep thinking of one I knew as a kid. 'Be still and know I am God.' Haven't said that in years." Daniel didn't want slogans, but the cadence landed like a hand on his shoulder. He looked at Laura, then at Mike. "I don't want to make Faith a show." "You're not on a stage," Laura said. "You're scared like the rest of us. That's allowed." The jet staggered again. A ripple of gasps traveled row to row. Emily checked latches, then braced in the aisle. "Everybody with me," she said. "In through the nose, hold, out, through the mouth." They followed because it gave them something to do. The engines groaned as the wings bit into messy air. A woman with silver hair, the one with the paperback, leaned into the aisle. "I'm Carol. I used to sing in a church trio in Ohio." She swallowed. "I forgot my prayers after my husband died, but I could still sing one chorus." She didn't sing now. She only whispered, "All I have needed, thy hand hath provided." No one applauded. The words settled into the space like an extra. "Belt!" Daniel realized he was holding his phone as if it were talisman and dead weight. He opened the lock screen, then shut it. No service, nothing to fix. The cockpit clicked on. "We've got a window to the south. We'll try for it," Captain Harris said. "We appreciate your patience." Daniel pictured the two men up front, hands steady, not because they felt calm, but because training taught muscles what to do when minds trembled. Skill could hold the line while faith whispered underneath. Emily slid into the seat opposite. "You're Daniel Reeves," she said. "My sister played your records through nursing school." Daniel managed half a smile. "I didn't write them for that." "Use what you've got," Emily said. "If you feel like praying for us, do it. Quiet is fine, loud is fine too." Daniel kept his eyes open, fixed on the seat back. "Be with us," he said under his breath. "Be with Evan. Be with Captain Harris. Be with Emily. Be with Renee and her boy. Be with Thomas. Be with Carol." Saying. Their names made the metal feel less cold. The plane twitched, then steadied for 2 heartbeats. The sentence came again, clear inside the noise. "I am in control." It didn't erase the fear. It put a boundary around it. Renee's boy looked up. "Are we going to fall?" Renee kissed his forehead. "We're going to land," she said, "and while we get there, we'll hold on together." For the first time since the first jolt, Daniel believed her. The cabin lights flickered again, then steadied. The sound of the engines filled every space, a reminder that thin layers of metal and fire were all that held them above the earth. Daniel closed his eyes against the hum, but it was everywhere, inescapable. Emily stayed buckled now, her jaw tight. The boy in the back had finally fallen into a restless doze against his mother's shoulder. Renee held him as if nothing else mattered. The jet lurched into a downward draft. Everything loose trembled. A magazine slid from under a seat, flapping like wings until it stopped against Daniel's shoe. He bent, picked it up, and passed it across the aisle to Carol. She smiled faintly, lips thin with strain. Then came the voice from the cockpit, clipped and urgent. "Brace yourselves. We're entering the gap." The grey outside grew darker, clouds swallowing even the thin light they had. It wasn't storm the way most thought of storms. No lightning, no rain streaks against the windows. It was worse. Nothing visible but the rolling mass that hid everything, the E2. Instruments up front told the truth, but back here all they had was senses screaming that gravity wanted them back. The aircraft dropped again, sharp and sudden. Gasps rippled through the rows, one man cursing aloud. Daniel gripped Laura's arm, her nails dug into his palm, grounding him. Thomas leaned forward, speaking not loud but clear enough to cross the aisle. "Don't look out the windows. Look at me. We'll stay right here, eyes open, breathing steady." It wasn't much, but some obeyed. They stared at Thomas like he was a metronome in chaos. Daniel's ears rang. His mind shouted that it could end any second. Yet beneath it all, the sentence remained. "I am in control." He repeated it, even when fear told him not to. The jet tilted left, then right, hunting smoother air. Daniel pressed his head to the headrest, forcing air through his nose. "If you're real," he muttered, "then keep us. Keep us even if the wings shake loose." For the first time, he didn't feel foolish saying it. The intercom crackled again. First Officer Evans' voice came this time, tight but determined. "Ride is rough but manageable. Hold tight. 5 minutes until clearer skies." 5 minutes. They measured it in jolts and breaths, in seconds stretched long. Carol whispered verses half-remembered. Mike hummed under his breath, not a tune anyone recognized, but steady, steady, steady. Daniel listened to them all. For the first time, the cabin didn't feel like strangers trapped together. It felt like something closer, souls tethered by fear, waiting for ground they couldn't see. When the shaking paused, brief as it was, the silence inside felt heavy. It was not peace. It was expectancy, like a hand hovering above them, waiting. Daniel swallowed hard, the words still lodged in his chest. "I am in control." He didn't yet know if he believed them, but they were the only thing louder than the storm. 5 minutes stretched like wire. The jet shivered in short, mean bursts, then lunged as if the air itself were tilting. Emily stayed strapped in, scanning the rows. Daniel watched her and felt helpless. There was nothing he could play or sign to make the sky behave. The intercom snapped. "Harris here, offsetting 20 degrees south to widen the gap. If the ride doesn't improve, we'll ask for lower. Seatbelts stay on." Mike tugged his cap. "If we go down," he muttered, "tell my brother I should have gone fishing." Laura elbowed him. "Don't do that." Softer. "You'll tell him yourself." A roll, a thunk from a bin, then a cry from the lav door. "I need out," a man called. "I can't be in here." The latch rattled. Emily hit the interphone. "Lav occupied. Passenger panicking." She unbuckled only when the shaking eased a fraction, then moved, bracing on seat backs. She pressed her palm to the door. "Sir, stay put a little longer. Breathe with me." The jet dipped. When the motion steadied, she cracked the door and guided the man to the nearest seat. He folded into it, face gray. She buckled him in and kept a hand on his shoulder until his breath matched hers. The words rose again in Daniel. "I am in control." He didn't announce them. He let them anchor him. Emily's steady voice, Laura's clenched fingers, the hum under every other noise. Thomas caught his eye. "If you've got something to say it," he murmured. "Not as the guy on the posters, as a man." Daniel swallowed. The mic on the bulkhead glinted, a temptation and a trap. He wasn't captain or crew or pastor. He was a passenger who made songs. That had to be enough. He kept his voice low, eyes open, hands flat on his thighs. "God, keep Captain Harris and Evan clear. Keep Emily steady. Give the air a little mercy." The airplane banged through another swell. Carol's paperback slid. Daniel caught it and handed it back. "My husband flew welders to jobs," she said. He'd say, "We don't control much, but we can be decent while it shakes." Evan returned to the radio. "Center cleared us down to 240, descending now. Bumpy through the layer." The engines deepened. Renee kissed her boy's head. "Almost there," she whispered. He nodded, eyes glossy. The smell thickened. Warm plastic, stale coffee, a trace of hot dust. Just a machine pushed hard. The seatbelt sign glowed with insistence. Daniel closed his eyes for one breath and opened them again. His hands had stopped trembling. He didn't feel safe. He felt carried, like a man in a winter river matching his steps to a rope. "I'm not in charge," he said, more to himself than to anyone else. Thomas nodded as if that were the prayer. The airplane took one more sharp punch, then steadied. Not smooth, not gentle, but steadier. Evan came back on. "Ride improving. We'll hold here and reassess." This was survival. One breath on the next. The sentence in his chest did not fade. "I am in control." He let it be the simplest thing he owned. The quiet that followed wasn't relief. It let a person hear his life. Daniel sat in it and knew he would not walk off this jet. The same man who boarded in sunshine. The descent into 24,000 feet brought no view, only thicker cloud pressing against every window. The grey was endless, as though they were sealed inside a tunnel with no walls, no floor, no exit. The hum of the engines never stopped, but the rhythm changed, lower, slower, with each step down. Captain Harris came back on the intercom. "We'll hold this level for a stretch. Reports below suggest occasional smooth pockets. We'll test the air here. First," a chorus of beeps from the galley broke the calm, overhead bins complaining against strain. Emily checked her straps. The lavatory passenger, still pale, whispered, "We are not built to be up here." No one argued. Daniel rubbed his forehead. His pulse had slowed, but the sweat on his palms hadn't dried. He caught Laura's stare and tried to grin. She shook her head. "Don't fake it. Not now." "I don't know what else to do," Daniel said. "Then just tell the truth," she answered. Truth. He remembered those words from Thomas earlier. He shut his eyes, and under the hum the sentence pulsed again, plain, unshaken. "I am in control." "Why me?" Daniel whispered. Not loud, not to be heard, but Thomas leaned anyway. Why any of us? You heard it. Maybe that's the answer. Carol tilted her head. What did he hear? Thomas said it. He heard God say he's in control. Murmurs rippled. Renee looked up, face pale. Did you really? She asked Daniel. Daniel hesitated, throat tight. Yes. Twice. Now not in my head, not like nerves, real. The cabin fell quiet. The only sound was air moving fast around fragile wings. Emily, still in her seat across from them, studied his face. Hold on to that, she said, even if nobody else can. Mike muttered, I believe it. Nothing else explains why we're still hanging up here. His words earned no laughs, only nods from faces too worn to doubt. The jet hit another shudder, less sharp than before, but enough to remind them they were still inside a storm without borders. Daniel gripped the armrest, repeating the sentence silently until it felt etched on his ribs. After the bump, a calm space came, not smooth, just less violent, the kind where lungs could draw a full breath. Passengers shifted, loosened their grips, looked at each other instead of only at the floor. Look, Renee whispered, pointing toward the window. For a moment, a tear in the cloud showed a sliver of pale sky beyond. Not blue, not bright, just lighter. Then the gap closed, again. But it was enough to make every chest in the cabin lift a little higher. Carol clasped her paperback like a hymn book. He's reminding us he hasn't gone anywhere, she said. Daniel didn't know if he was ready to claim that, but he knew the voice hadn't left him. The cabin settled into a new silence, not fear this time, but waiting. The hum of the engines pressed on, a steady growl through aluminum ribs. The turbulence hadn't stopped, but it had changed, less like fists, more like heavy waves, rocking them. Still, no one forgot how quickly it could turn. Captain Harris's voice returned, measured, controlled. Holding 24,000. Reports from aircraft south suggest moderate chop, nothing severe. We'll attempt to intercept that lane. Seatbelts stay on. Moderate chop. Daniel tried to hang on to the phrase it meant survivable, but the faces around him weren't statistics. They were pale and drawn, hands clenched against armrests. Renee leaned forward, speaking softly so her boy wouldn't wake. If you really heard him, say it again, out loud, we need it. Daniel froze. Every instinct told him to stay quiet. He wasn't a preacher. He was a singer who wrote songs about heartbreak and neon lights. Faith wasn't his stage. But Thomas nodded. She's right. If it was real, don't keep it to yourself. Daniel's throat tightened. He could still hear the words, plain, unpolished, firm. I am in control. They had carried him through the last half hour, each syllable a rope he clung to, when the jet dropped. Now they wanted him to hand it to the others. Emily, still strapped in across the aisle, gave the faintest nod. Sometimes the right words come from the wrong people. If you've got them, speak them. The jet jolted hard, as if underlining her point. Gasps filled the cabin, then silence. Daniel drew one long breath. I heard something, he said, voice rough. I don't know how to explain it. Twice now, 3 times maybe, I heard a voice. Not from the cockpit, not from any of. It said, I am in control. The words hung in the air like smoke. No one laughed. No one rolled eyes. They were too far past that. Carol whispered, That's enough. Her paperback slipped to the floor, forgotten. Renee stroked her boy's hair and whispered the sentence into his ear. Thomas bowed his head, lips moving silently. Mike nodded and sat taller, as though the floor had steadied under him. Daniel leaned back, pulse racing. He hadn't wanted to say it, but now that it was out, he felt lighter, as if the weight had been passed into the cabin itself. Another pocket hit, sharp, short. But the cries were fewer this time. The silence afterward wasn't empty. It was filled with something Daniel couldn't name, but he knew it wasn't fear alone anymore. Emily broke it first. Then we'll hang on to that, she said simply. The engines droned on. Clouds pressed close. The turbulence shook them again. But the words lingered, repeated quietly by lips across the rows, a thread weaving them together. I am in control. The reprieve didn't last. The sky seized the jet again, shaking it as if it were a toy in giant hands. Loose objects rattled, plastic creaked, and the engines strained louder. Daniel's stomach lurched into his throat. Emily gripped her harness, bracing against the wall. Renee bent over her son, arms wrapped around him like armor. Mike muttered curses into his palms, then switched back to prayer without pause. The intercom snapped alive. "Captain Harris, folks, this is worse than forecast. We're holding course for the southern lane, but expect sharp jolts. Keep seated." His tone was clipped, no wasted words. The next jolt slammed Daniel against the armrest, his shoulder aching. Laura gasped, clutching his sleeve. Her nails dug through fabric, grounding herself in him. He squeezed back. A cry came from the rear, a man calling out for God by name. It wasn't elegant, just raw. Others joined, fragments of prayers spilling into the roar. Carol's whisper turned. Louder. Thomas repeated the sentence. "He's in control, he's in control." The plane dropped hard, like the bottom had fallen out. Screams erupted. A bottle flew, struck the ceiling, and fell. The child whimpered but did not cry this time. His mother's steady whisper held him. Daniel shut his eyes. He couldn't silence the panic rising, but the voice came again, clear and firm. "I am in control." It wasn't thunderous. It was steady, the opposite of the storm around him. He clung to it. He spoke it. Again, this time louder, filling the cabin. "He says he's in control." Every head turned. Some stared with disbelief, others with desperate hope. The turbulence didn't stop, but something shifted inside. People repeated it after him. A chorus of trembling voices spread row to row. "He's in control, he's in control." The words didn't fix the shaking. They fixed the people. Fear was still there, but it no longer had the whole room. Daniel opened his eyes. For the first time since the storm began, he saw something in their faces besides terror. They weren't calm, but they weren't alone. The engines roared, the jet bucked again. Still, the voices kept rising, stronger each time the air tried to silence them. Emily, her lips moving with the rest, caught Daniel's eye and nodded once. It was all the confirmation he needed. They were in the storm. They might not escape it for miles, but something bigger than fear had broken through the metal walls. The jet clawed south, engines straining as if dragging the sky with them. Every pocket of air hit like a pothole on a dark highway. The cabin rattled so violently the overhead lights flickered. No one moved except to tighten belts or squeeze hands tighter. First Officer Evans' voice broke through the static. "We're entering the southern corridor. Ride may improve in stages. Stay secure." Stages. Daniel held on to that word. It meant not all at once. It meant survival was measured in steps. Another drop rattled bones. A suitcase popped its latch overhead but stayed wedged in place. Emily's eyes stayed fixed on it, her whole body braced, but she didn't rise. Her training told her it wasn't safe. Laura breathed hard through her nose, whispering numbers, counting through each hit. Daniel tried it too. Numbers gave a rhythm. But then he added the words, "I am in control." Each count became more than just a measure of time. It became a tether. Thomas across the aisle clasped his cap in both hands, lips moving fast. Carol held her, paperback like a Bible, whispering lines she half remembered. Renee kissed her boy's forehead again and again, murmuring the sentence Daniel had given them all. When the next jolt came, it threw the whole cabin forward. Gasps filled the space, but this time no one screamed. They were busy repeating what Daniel had said. The sentence echoed across rows like a chant. Daniel heard his own voice mixed with theirs, no louder, no more important, but part of the whole. He realized he wasn't leading them. He was simply one of them, caught in the same storm, clinging to the same words. Then the cabin lights dimmed, flickered, and steadied again. A hush followed, broken only by the engine's endless groan. For a moment, it felt like the storm was deciding whether to keep them or release them. Captain Harris returned, voice rough. "We'll level at 220. Reports below suggest lighter chop. Still with us?" "Yes," someone shouted from the back. The answer rippled into laughter, tight, nervous but real. the first sound of its kind since the turbulence began. Daniel felt tears sting his eyes, though he hadn't cried in years, not even when his father died, not even when he buried friends. Something about this storm, this sentence, and this fragile group of strangers pressed it all loose. He wiped his face with his sleeve, not ashamed. No one would mistake it for weakness. Not here. Not now. The aircraft trembled again, not as harsh as before. Daniel gripped the armrest and whispered, "One more stage, just get us through one more." He didn't know who he was asking. He didn't need to. The words were enough. The descent to 22,000 feet brought a pocket of calm, fragile as glass. For 2 whole minutes, the jet rode steady. Passengers loosened shoulders, uncurled fists. Someone even laughed softly, the kind of sound that comes after holding breath too long. Emily unbuckled, moving row to row to check belts. "We're not through yet," she reminded them. Her voice was gentler now, less forced. "Keep strapped in." Daniel exhaled slowly. For the first time since the first violent jolt, he let his spine sink against the seat back. Laura touched his arm. "Maybe this is it," she whispered. But then the storm struck again. Without warning, the jet dropped as if the floor had been ripped away. Screams tore through the cabin. The boy cried out, clutching Renee's shirt. Overhead, bins rattled, one bursting open, spilling a backpack into the aisle. Emily lunged, caught it before it rolled, and wedged it under a seat. She slammed the bin closed and dropped back into her harness, just as another violent shake hit. The engines roared, wings groaning as if twisted. Daniel's chest seized. His throat burned with a shout he couldn't swallow. "Stay with me," Thomas called across the aisle. His voice was loud, steady, unnatural in its strength. Say it with me." "I am in control," Carol whispered. Renee repeated it into her boy's ear. Others joined, scattered, trembling, then louder. Daniel gripped Laura's hand. His own lips moved without command. The sentence filled his mouth, filled his chest, until it drowned out the roar outside. "I am in control. I am in control." The jet shuddered again, hard enough to make teeth knock. But the chant didn't stop. Row to row, voice to voice, the words circled the cabin like a rope binding them together. The intercom snapped. Captain Harris's voice was louder than before, firm over the noise. "We've cleared the edge. Hold steady, this should be the last of it." Another surge rocked them, the harshest yet. Luggage thumped, lights flickered, passengers cried out, but the words kept rising, defying the chaos. Daniel's throat ached, but he didn't stop. The words weren't his anymore, they belonged to all of them. Then, as quickly as it had begun, the storm loosened its grip. The violent shaking dropped into a shiver, then into a steady hum. The engines leveled. The overhead lights steadied. No one moved, no one cheered. The silence that followed was thick, stunned, fragile. Daniel leaned his head back, heart pounding. He could still hear the sentence inside him, steady as breath. "I am in control." For the first time, he believed it. The calm didn't feel real at first. Every shoulder stayed tense, waiting for the next invisible hand to shove them down again. The engines purred steady. The wings no longer groaned, but fear kept its grip even after the sky released. Them. Emily unclipped her harness, her legs shaking as she stood. She walked the aisle slowly, touching shoulders, meeting eyes. "It's easing," she said. "You did it. We're still here." No one clapped, no one cheered, but heads lifted. Some smiled weakly, some wept without shame. Daniel's throat hurt. His palms were raw from gripping the armrest. Laura leaned against him, silent tears on her cheeks. Mike stared straight ahead, lips still moving with words no one else could hear. Thomas looked, over, cap still in his hands. "You said what we needed, friend, don't forget it." Carol bent to pick up her paperback, then set it aside. "No story in here compares," she said softly. The boy stirred in Renee's arms, blinking at the quiet. "Did we land?" he asked. "Not yet," Renee whispered, kissing his hair. "But we will." The intercom cracked. First Officer Evans' voice carried relief for the first time. "We're through the worst. Ride should stay light from here. We'll continue descent into Nashville as planned. Thank you for holding steady. Thank you. Simple words, but they filled the cabin with a new kind of weight, gratitude instead of fear. Daniel rubbed his eyes. He remembered every stage of the storm, every drop, every scream, every whispered prayer. He remembered the words that came from nowhere but inside the noise. I am in control. He wanted to dismiss it, to call it nerves, but he couldn't. It was too clear, too solid. It had carried him when nothing else could. Emily, stopped by his row, crouched so her voice wouldn't carry. You gave them something to hold. Don't underestimate that. Daniel shook his head. I just repeated what I heard. Sometimes that's all anyone needs, she said, then moved on. The cabin shifted into the quiet of survivors. Not relief yet, not until wheels touched ground, but something close. Some held hands, some sat still, eyes closed, letting muscles loosen one by one. Daniel leaned his head back, chest heavy, tears still drying on his face. He wasn't sure what came next, on the ground, in his life, in the songs he sang, but he knew this. He had heard something that could not be ignored. The storm had given it to him, and the storm had passed. The sky outside the windows finally thinned. Clouds broke apart into soft streaks, sunlight cutting through in pale shafts. For the first time in hours, the horizon showed itself, not bright, not clear, but real. The seatbelt sign stayed lit. The intercom clicked. Captain Harris spoke, his voice steadier now. Ladies and gentlemen, we've cleared the worst of the turbulence. We're starting our final descent into Nashville. Weather at the field is calm. We'll be on the ground in 25 minutes. The words hit the cabin like warm air in winter. Passengers exhaled all at once, shoulders falling, hands unclenching. Some cried openly, no longer holding it back. Emily walked the aisle one last time, slower now, steadying herself against seats. She stopped at Daniel's row. Final. Stretch, she said, voice gentler than ever. Daniel nodded. Thank you for holding us together. Emily shook her head. You all held each other. The engines changed pitch, softer now, guiding them lower. The grey outside gave way to fields and rivers below, a patchwork of earth waiting for them. Renee kissed her boy's forehead. See? We're almost home. The boy pressed his face to the window, wide-eyed, no longer afraid. Thomas tucked his cap back on, staring out with tears drying on his cheeks. Carol closed her eyes and whispered one last line of the hymn she had carried. Mike sat straighter, silent but steady. Laura leaned against Daniel's shoulder, breathing deeply for the first time since takeoff. Daniel looked around the cabin. Strangers who had boarded quietly now carried something unspoken together. He thought of the words that had carried them. I am in control. They weren't just his anymore. They belonged to all of them. The flaps extended with a mechanical groan. The runway stretched out ahead, long and straight. The cabin grew quiet again, not with fear but with waiting. The wheels hit the tarmac with a heavy thud, tires screeching, then rolling. The fuselage shuddered, brakes roared, but it was the sweetest noise Daniel had ever heard. Cheers broke out this time, nervous, tearful, relieved. The aircraft slowed, turned onto the taxiway, engines humming lower. Only then did the seatbelt sign finally blink off. Applause rose, uneven but real. Some hugged, some bowed their heads. Emily clapped once, smiling through tears. Daniel stayed still, letting the sound wash over him. He knew nothing about his career, or the headlines waiting outside this plane would ever matter, as much as the voice he had heard in the storm. I am in control. It wasn't a lyric, it wasn't a slogan. It was the truth that had carried them through the longest flight of their lives. And as the jet rolled toward the gate, Daniel whispered it once more, not for anyone else, but for